The search of a Winnipeg-area landfill for Morgan Harris and Marcedes Myran has already been successful. But unfortunately, politics has played a role throughout the fight to get the search done. For more on that, our Truth in Politics panel is here. Jennifer Leywitz is CEO of Pasqua Harbour Strategies, and Niigaan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Niigaan, Jennifer, good to have you with us. A lot has happened since we were last together, including the discovery of the remains of both Morgan Harris and Marcedes Myran at the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg. The search will also continue for now. Jennifer, your thoughts on all of this?
You know, I think the news in the last little bit has been very sad, but also very eye-opening. Unfortunately, when we're talking about, women, especially Indigenous women, losing their lives, you have to walk this fine line of we want to talk about what their lives meant and the legacy that they're going to leave, but also there is that political aspect of look at everything that led up to this and the landfill search and the polarization of this search and, the Manitoba Conservatives that campaigned against this. I'm actually just on the road leaving the provincial budget yesterday. That's why I'm in my car. And I had heard yesterday in the announcement that there was almost $1 million from the provincial government in Saskatchewan being allocated to missing and murdered Indigenous women response for Indigenous women, Two-Spirit people. And I thought this was a step in the right direction. I don't know exactly what the parameters of using that type of funding would be for, but it's nice to see that provincial governments are almost starting to wake up, especially here in Saskatchewan, seeing what happened in Manitoba and seeing a provincial government response here that's going to look to try to offset what we're seeing and hopefully use that money in ways that make sense and can prevent things like this from happening.
Yeah, Manitoba budget happening today. I understand there might be something like that as well. We'll get to later. Niigaan, the Winnipeg police said it couldn't be done. The former premier of Manitoba said it couldn't be done. And yet it has been done, and in rather short order. What does that say to you?
Yeah, just under 3 months and under budget. The original budget was $20 million from the federal government, $20 million from the provincial government. It was originally projected to be upwards of $180 million to do a full search of the landfill. It just tells you that this was always feasible, this was always doable, and that people had to try. And one thing that Premier Canoe, who certainly I don't think we'll say this is a political victory because it is a tragedy. It is 100% about the families and about the loved ones of Morgan Harris and Marcedes Myran, and the fact that we're still looking for a Buffalo woman as we're continuing to look for her. This is not a political victory, but it is certainly a victory for the right or the good, the correct thing to do in this particular situation, which is that there is a massive problem in Manitoba in terms of respecting Indigenous women and girls, treating them as human beings, seeing that they are worth searching for, like any other group, any other people would be searched for in this province.
Jennifer, you'd mentioned that your chief had made mention of making changes to landfills themselves. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when I had posted about this on LinkedIn the other day, my Chief Sean Longman of George Gordon First Nation had commented essentially saying that there needs to be changes made to landfills because our First Nations women should not be able to be just dumped into landfills. And what worried me, and we actually had this conversation yesterday because he was present at the provincial budget, is when you saw the political piece of this entire search hit the media and you saw a provincial party that wasn't government at the time saying over and over again, it's impossible, we're not even going to bother. What was that telling people outside of that, especially people that are, do things with evil intentions, and also the value of life that we're placing on our women? If you're essentially saying, well, if it's the landfill, it's off limits, we're never going to touch it, it's a lost cause. So what changes need to be made to landfills and people utilizing landfills and the records that are kept? Because there are landfills, that was even a conversation that happened yesterday about the municipal policies around landfills. Because if there are, RMs or municipalities that don't have as strict of rules around the use of landfills, this could essentially become a very scared territory when people start to recognize that it's essentially no man's land, and that we're going to have political parties that won't even attempt to search them because they're worried about the cost, or they're worried about how difficult it is. So I'm really glad that Premier Wab Kinew essentially took the lead on this as the Premier, especially from all the advocacy from the late Grand Chief Kathy Merrick. And said, you know what, it is doable. And if anything, we're at least going to try. And Nigon is absolutely correct. It was under budget and under the time frame that they initially thought it would take. So that shows that everyone's life is valuable, and we can't just let things like this slide.
Nigon, a new Winnipeg police chief was sworn in this week. He's been meeting with the Myran and Harris families. Does any of this lead you to believe the Winnipeg Police Service, who refused to search the landfill when the new chief was the deputy chief, no less, will do any better in the future?
These are tough questions because we don't have any track record or evidence to point to say it's not hopeful, or there won't be any changes, or there will be any changes. I think opening up with conversations is good. I think that a new police chief should be listening twice as much before he speaks. I think a new police chief has a great deal of relationships to begin to rectify, recognize, rebuild, revitalize. There's a new police chief in Winnipeg isn't an easy job to do, but it's a job that is in so many ways quite simple. Treat people with respect and with dignity, and particularly those communities that have been disrespected and have been treated in undignified ways the most in the past. That should be your number one priority. Your number one priority should be that those who have been most disenfranchised, harmed, forgotten about by this police service should be the first now to be focused upon, supported, listened to when it comes to changing the Winnipeg Police Service. We don't have a track record to know whether this new police chief will do that. I will just say that from the institution that he just was a part of, that is, he is a longtime serving member within, and certainly was in the room for a lot of these discussions where the word feasibility was used to discuss Indigenous peoples and their remains. I'll be cautiously optimistic to hope that there will be something different.
Before we dig into the fact that we have a new prime minister since our last show, and an election is about a month away, it is budget season. Manitoba government unveiling its budget today. Saskatchewan did earlier in the week. Jen, like you said, you were there and you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, it's always very interesting to see provincial budgets that are getting released. I'm starting to see that there's a little bit more Indigenous representation in our provincial legislative building, which is nice. Yesterday, my chief of George Gordon First Nation had the opportunity to be there. The chief of James Smith Cree Nation was there, and also a councillor. And so it was just really nice to start seeing some representation. It would be nice to see more. My chief did make the comment directly to the premier yesterday that he would actually like to see more nods to the treaty rights in the legislative building. And he actually critiqued some of the artwork that was happening in the building as well, because he said it's just outdated and it's not relevant. And it would be nice to see more Indigenous artists come in, because Saskatchewan does have a very long history with First Nations people, especially down in Treaty 4. And yeah, it was nice to see some announcements made on Indigenous priorities. I would have liked to see a little bit more money set aside for Indigenous education, because I know that that's a big priority right now for First Nations University and other Indigenous institutions. But seeing some other targeted spending, like missing and murdered Indigenous women, great start there. So it seems like the provincial government is starting to see a little bit more benefit in actually working with Indigenous people. But I'll reiterate what I said yesterday, and I'll say it again. We still need to be at that table. We still need to be part of those discussions, and budgets should be created in a way that is done in consultation with First Nations. And I did see yesterday there's $1 million set aside for consultation policy, so due to consult essentially. So I don't know entirely what that means, but it looks like it's a start.
Moving to federal politics, Nigon, the Liberals selected a new leader and in turn a new prime minister since we were last here in an absolute blowout. Your thoughts on the new PM's job so far?
Yeah, Mark Carney coming in at 86% support a huge mandate from the Liberal Party. Not a mandate from Canadians yet, because he's not elected by Canadians. But let's not forget that this is the way Canadian government works. Over a dozen unelected prime ministers have served in office, sometimes for years. And so don't think this is some kind of anomaly, or I can see lots of conspiracy theories out there. We shouldn't listen to an unelected prime minister. It's just nonsense. Two things that have marked Mark Carney's first time in office, first week in office. First thing he did was not go traditionally, like most Canadian prime ministers, go to the United States to visit with the president. He went to Europe to visit with allies who generally are all lining up against the president, and invited Ukrainian President Zelensky, who is well known now for having been certainly at odds with President Trump, to that meeting with European leaders. That's significant. The second thing that he did is he went to Iqaluit on the way home, which certainly he's from the North. He's from Northwest Territories, originally born in Fort Smith, then moved to Edmonton when he was just a small boy. And then talked about Arctic sovereignty. Very different to Pierre Poilievre, who went to the Arctic, who, yes, made also an announcement about Arctic sovereignty, but was not with anyone of any note other than just himself and a lot of snow standing out there. Mark Carney was surrounded by leadership, met with the premier. Of course, he's the prime minister, so he does have that privilege, but it's a very stark difference. And I think what's been signing the first week in office for Mark Carney is that he's gearing up for an election. He's going to call an election this week, probably this weekend. It'll probably be for May 5th. And that election will then therefore face Canadians, where the ballot box issue will be one issue and one issue only. Who will be the adult in the room dealing with President Trump? And on that case, it seems to be Canadians are a little bit more convinced at a unelected politician versus an elected lifelong politician.
We'll come back to that in a second. Jennifer, your thoughts, though, first on Mark Carney's first couple of weeks on the job and the huge flip in the polls that has gone on.
First of all, I think it's absolutely crazy that the last time we did this, we didn't have him as a prime minister yet. So a lot can change in politics. A week is a very long time in politics. I honestly, I wholeheartedly believe the polls. I'm somebody that is very analytical and I love data. And I've said this over the last year that it's not necessarily that the Liberal Party itself was deeply unpopular. It was that Justin Trudeau was becoming increasingly unpopular. And this was honestly the best case scenario for the Liberals, was to replace their leader. And that's exactly what they did. And it seems that the Liberals are bouncing back in a sense that they're making more sense to where we are at politically right now. Nigon is absolutely correct. Who's going to be the adult in the room? Because this is the first time that I've been in more conservative leaning spaces in Saskatchewan, especially around the budget, where I'm hearing from even Saskatchewan residents that are like, they're scared of Donald Trump. And I encourage people to almost step outside of their echo chambers, because if you're surrounded by a bunch of people that are telling you that President Donald Trump is great for Canada, then I think you might be stuck in a little bit of an echo chamber, because I'm talking to different people all day, every day. And the majority of people are they're scared of what Donald Trump means for Canada. They don't want to see that in Canada. And I think that Pierre Poilievre's biggest fault is that he has not come out strong enough against Donald Trump. And it seems like he's almost trying to do things that keep that relationship really positive for him. Meanwhile, Canadians across the country are like, no, we want our sovereignty. And sovereignty for Canadians is sovereignty for First Nations. We want to be able to promote our businesses. We don't want tariffs to affect our economy. And it seems like Pierre Poilievre is just missing the mark entirely, where Mark Carney is actually benefiting from it. And he seems to be on an arrow that is benefiting his party.
Nigon, aside from whoever looks like they're the adult in the room, what are you going to be looking for over the next 4 or 5 weeks as we head into a federal election?
Okay, so 3 questions. The first is, can the Pierre Poilievre conservative machine reignite, restart? This was a master of handling image, messaging, generally media. I mean, he didn't talk to most media. He talked to the media that he wanted to talk to, but that message still resonated with Canadians. And generally Canadians across the board. Was very popular. At one point led in 26 points against the Liberals. All of that is gone now. They're in a statistical tie, and a statistical tie, according to almost every pollster, and if you want a great pollster, check out Eric Grenier, who does some really great stuff with the RIT. A a statistical tie means a Liberal minority. And the more the Liberals gain traction, 3-4 points ahead, that will turn into majority territory, particularly because the Conservatives have made inroads in Quebec, which will split the support of the Bloc and lead to Liberal victories in Quebec, which if there's Liberal victories in Quebec, that will be a majority. So that's the first thing I'm looking for is will the Conservative messaging, which has been on its back heel now for a few weeks, I think it doesn't know how to deal with the issue of Donald Trump because you have major supporters of Donald Trump who make a significant amount of Conservative supporters in the country. And I get Poilievre's got a very tough spot to be in, but it's also a spot that he created himself. He created his own image as one who is someone who tears down much more than builds. And that's a Donald Trumpism. He built an image of rejection first, ask questions later. That's a Donald Trumpism. Chaos as opposed to solution. That's a Donald Trumpism. So he's put himself in kind of a similar Venn diagram with Donald Trump. It's tough to divorce yourself from that. Even if Donald Trump himself says that he would rather face a Liberal than you as a kind of way to support you. Second is, can Carney handle the rigor of an election campaign? We've seen him show a few different cracks of losing temper with media, and I think that shows an inexperienced politician. But I can also tell you that that might just be what Canadians want. Maybe Canadians want somebody who wasn't in politics. Maybe they want someone who's completely outside the system and maybe loses his temper. I'm not sure. We're completely off the map here when it comes to what politics looks like. And the third is the gutting, the bottoming out of almost all NDP support across the country, virtually unilaterally moving towards the Liberals. I've had NDP insiders who have said to me that if we keep the furniture after this election, meaning party status, they'll be shocked. And I think that they're looking at probably even single-digit seats, if they're lucky, a dozen, 13, 14 seats after this election.
Crazy. Jennifer, what are you going to be looking for as we head to the polls here?
A little bit more targeted spending. And I know that the term spending right now is not something that Canadians want to hear, but what we saw out of a Harper government was very restrictive. It was very restrained. Harper sat on his fiscal fence post and didn't want to move off of it. Justin Trudeau kind of came in the other end of things. And as somebody that works with First Nations, I can tell you right now that there were a lot of commitments. There were a lot of spending, but one of the issues is it was in so many different areas, and sometimes it wasn't even enough because when nations are able to tap into funding in various different areas, but it's almost not enough to build anything meaningful. It's like, yeah, we can do almost 25% of our goal in all of these different areas, but it's hard to reach that 100%. I'm not opposed to spending. I would like to see a little bit more fiscal restraint from Mark Carney saying, hey, you know what? If addictions and mental health and the poverty crisis on nations is significant, then we need to be targeting our spending in those areas so nations can tap into that and build plans that work. And, Pierre, I think right now it's that hard conversation of if there's too much restraint, then you're going to see some of those issues run rampant and they're going to be worse. Because the fact of the matter is that when nations run out of resources, then there's nothing else to turn to. And that's when things get out of hand. And I want to offer Canadians a little bit of hope that I know that, the Liberal government's been in power for 9 years. People are exhausted, but Mark Carney is an entirely different leader than Justin Trudeau. He has an entirely different history than Justin Trudeau. And this might be what Canadians need. And I'm not going to tell anybody who to vote for, but I just like to approach things with optimism and hope and give everybody an opportunity to show us how they lead and what they can give us. And if Mark Carney wins the election, I'm going to attempt to work with him and his government the best way I can. If Pierre Poilievre wins the election, same thing. I don't think Jagmeet Singh is going to win the election, but inevitably I'll still be there to hopefully work with him in whatever capacity he has left after this next election.
He'll have it. If it's what I just said, the NDP will probably be looking for a new leader. And I say that with respect. Jagmeet Singh has done, I think, an admirable job and has gotten more done for the NDP than any other federal leader in modern history. But I don't think it's really going to matter in Donald Trump is in the room.
Does modern history not include Jack Layton then, or?
I think did Jack Layton get things done federally in the same levels that Jagmeet Singh did? Probably not.
Became opposition though. That's pretty good.
Oh, did he get support? For sure. Yeah. But did he get things done legislatively?
Right. Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there, panelists. It's great to see you again, and we'll talk next week.
Thank
you.